I'd like to introduce our next panel, which is really sort of the insights and the stories and the reporting that's actually going on as part of that actually drove a lot of these campaigns. So I'd love to just introduce, and everybody who comes on, just put on their video. That would be great, which is the first person I'd like to introduce is Russel Jeung. He is the professor of Asian American Studies in San Francisco State University and a co-founder of the Stop AAPI team. So hi, Russel, good to see you. I'm going to introduce Benny Lowe, co-founder of NextShark, the leading site for Asian American and Asian news from entertainment, business, politics, and tech. So Benny, great to see you. I'd like to get Maria Lee out here. She is the Associate Creative Director at Goodby, Silverstein and Partners, and the creator of Respond to Racism, a tool that arms people with information to respond to racism. And then finally, Maulik Pancholy, an actor and author, chairman and co-founder of the anti-bullying nonprofit Act to Change, which was launched during his time serving on President Obama's advisory commission. So welcome, Maulik. I have a lot to learn from you based on the town halls that you've actually hosted in the past. So great to have you here. I'd love to first throw the question over to Russel and really get a sense of, why the formation of Stop AAPI Hate? What are some of the trends that you're seeing in the data collection process? What's been sort of surprising to you?
Well, as an Asian American scholar, I knew from previous epidemics that came from Asia, Asians would be scapegoated, they would face interpersonal violence, and then racist policies would be enacted against them. So when we heard about the coronavirus arriving from China, we knew that history would repeat itself, and we immediately contacted government agencies to try to collect data on incidents of racism. We had heard it anecdotally starting in January of people being shunned, of people being harassed, but our state government didn't have the capacity. So with Chinese for Affirmative Action and with the Asian Pacific Planning and Policy Council, we created Stop AAPI Hate, a website to collect reports. And in mid-March, we launched, and immediately we were flooded with hundreds of reports a day. And we were actually shocked at the pervasiveness, how widespread these incidents were. We have data from over 45 states, as well as Washington, D.C. We're getting it from a range of people. We have 12 different languages, and limited English proficient respondents make up 5 to 10% of our reports. So you don't think of immigrants or even the elderly reporting, but 1 out of 9 of our reports come from the elderly. So Asian Americans aren't silent, aren't quiet. They know when they're being mistreated, and if they could find Stop AAPI Hate, they're taking the time to fill out a report, and because they are aggrieved, they are clear that this is racism affecting them. And so we've been tabulating the data, and we've been noticing the trends, and we've noticed that certain populations are particularly vulnerable, that people see certain groups of Asian Americans as easier to attack, and so they have been. Children and youth have been particularly harassed at schools and online. As I said, elderly make up 1 out of 9 of our respondents, and women, Asian American women, are harassed 2.5 times more than men. So again, it's a power dynamic. When people feel like they can bully others, they will, and they're using coronavirus as an excuse. Another clear trend is most of the cases are verbal harassment and shunning, about 80% of the cases, but they're not mere microaggressions. They're actually really hate-filled, virulent, traumatizing cases where people get yelled at, they have racial epithets slung at them, and oftentimes xenophobic statements are said. So people are told, go back to China, you effing chink. And so we've noticed, it's clear in our data, that when the presidential or candidates use terms like Chinese virus, that leads to a spike in anti-Asian racism. So we can make that connection between the political rhetoric of today and the anti-Asian racism. And I think finally, we have civil rights violations, but along with verbal harassment and civil rights violation, we're having a lot of hate crimes enacted against us. These are physical assaults where people get arrested. A lot of cases of spitting and coughing. So it's a public health threat, but people feel like Asians have come and infected us, so we want to reinfect them. And the hate crimes are when people actually get pushed and shoved, rocks and bottles thrown at them, and people actually get physically knifed. So like the personal anecdotes we've heard from the initial panelists, that's happening every day across the country to Asian Americans all around, not only this country, but around the world. And currently 75% of Asian Americans fear racial bias. And we should know because our family and friends are experiencing it. I think the scariest thing for me, seeing over 2,000 incidents and reading through them and how hateful they are, is again, how conditional the status of Asian Americans are in the US. You know, when we see the Black Lives Matter issue arise, Asian Americans are sort of wrestling with our own identity, our racial identity. Are we complicit with whites? Are we in solidarity with African Americans? And we don't feel like we belong. And partially it's because we're racialized as Orientals, that we're Easterners who are opposite the West. We're inferior to the West. We're outsiders to the West. And so when the coronavirus hit, we're no longer the model minority, but on the inside of America, but we're on the outside of America. And we're perceived as perpetual foreigners, outside threats who are bringing in diseases. So for me, I guess the surprising thing is how quickly we've shifted from being model minorities in the eyes of others to being the perpetual foreigners who don't belong here, who shouldn't be here, and are getting harassed to leave. And so these are really difficult times, and I think we really need to be vigilant. And I thank groups like the Ad Council and all the marketing groups that have been doing these social media efforts. They've been really helping.
Thank you, Russell, for some of those powerful stories. If you could just keep your audio on and let the other panelists also keep your audio on so we can get a full sort of panel view here as well, just to kind of freeze it. You know, powerful words, Russell. I wanted to give Benny the opportunity to share a little bit about NextShark, because you're covering this. There's a lot of emotional stories that you're actually seeing. Would love to get a sense from you as to, at your perch, what you're seeing and some of the more emotional resonating stories that you've kind of uncovered in all of your news coverage.
Yeah, you know, thank you, Elliot, for that kind introduction, and thank you 3AF for this opportunity. So I run NextShark.com. We're the largest online publication, online media destination for Asian Americans. Our audience skews a little bit younger, so we see it like so our #1 demographic is like 18 to 34. I've been running this company for about 7 years now, and I would say that, you know, from January up until now, I think we've done around like 600 stories on the novel coronavirus, right? And, you know, in the beginning of like, let's say January and early February, like there really wasn't like too many sort of incidences, but towards the end of it, like February 27th, that's when like things started kind of taking off, and we started seeing like maybe, we were seeing up to like, you know, 50 news tips DMs across our social media channels and across of our reporters' emails pretty much daily of incidences that started happening. And it was very concerning to us, obviously. And, you know, so far, out of the 600 stories that we've done, you know, over 250 of them have been, you know, harassment, discrimination, and, you know, racism related, and around 50 of them have been related to physical attacks. And you got to take these statistics kind of with a grain of salt, because there are a ton of other stories, you know, that have been out there, but, you know, oftentimes, you know, culturally, a lot of, you know, victims that we speak to, they don't necessarily, you know, want this to kind of get out. And so unfortunately, a lot of these stories that, you know, we feel are really important, like never really get to see the light of day. And so it's definitely been very daunting for us to kind of see this sort of like uptrend. It's definitely hit us emotionally because I do have like a young team. I mean, most of my team is, you know, under the age of 35. And, you know, for them to, you know, kind of come in and, you know, the responsibilities is to, you know, report and verify these stories, and oftentimes having to see some of the most like, you know, sometimes gruesome, violent videos, it takes a hit mentally. And, you know, to be honest, I mean, we've had, I've needed to give a lot of our writers like, vacations and times off because it's very daunting to kind of, to see this, but but to actually having to dive deep into it and being exposed to this every day, it's definitely been, it's been tough. That's how to say that.
Yeah. Well, I know, seeing and reading all of those stories can be very emotionally intense. And I'll turn it over to Maria from Goodby to kind of share some of her experience of like why she created this platform called Respond to Racism and where sort of the origin story for that was.
Sure. I mean, first of all, thanks for having me. So grateful to be here with all of you. So Respond to Racism is a collaborative platform that uses technology, creativity, and empathy to respond to racism against people of color. It's a volunteer initiative that I spearheaded at Goodby, Silverstein and Partners. And like so many of you, it was born out of a sense of urgency back in April when we saw this spike in very alarming, hateful attacks against the Asian community because of the coronavirus's, first outbreak in China. And my family, who's Korean Canadian, like countless other Asian families, was targeted not once, but multiple times. And I was angry. My mother is an elderly woman living by herself. And my brother is a physician treating COVID-19 patients, fighting on the front lines every day. So my team and I, we wanted to, find a way to convert this anger into action. But there was this reality of being quarantined. So there are limitations to what we can do, right? And as we dove into research, what we found out is that the root of this problem really lies in the language that people are using to refer to the virus. Kung flu, Chinese virus, slanted eye virus, rice rabies. I mean, I could go on. People get very creative. And these unofficial names were giving the virus a nationality and adding a cultural layer to this deadly pandemic. And what that did, it was normalizing all the scapegoating and stigmatization, leading to real world incidents. And one of the places where, we saw over 900% increase in this hate speech against Asians and the use of these terms was on social media, specifically on Twitter. So we created a Twitter bot that responds to these racist hashtags with videos featuring Asian frontline workers who deliver a very personal and educational message around how these words that people are carelessly using do have a detrimental impact on our community. These words don't just disappear into the abyss. They're hurting your doctors, nurses, friends, neighbors, colleagues. So through this sort of visual narrative, visual storytelling, we were able to humanize the online interaction on Twitter and create a more empathetic experience. And this bot also tweets these tips on how you can respond to racism online and in real life. Because another thing that we learned from research is that oftentimes people just don't know how to step in and help the victim in a safe and effective manner. So given all of these things and just the volume of these hateful terms that are being published every single second online, it just made sense to create a bot that's able to work 24/7 to respond. It's, it never gets tired, it's scalable and educational.
Thank you, Maria. It is an incredible technology that sort of, as you said, scales. And I think something that, again, shows the action that you took from a sort of a personal pain to something actually doing something about it that not only sort of helps you, but also helps a larger community. So thank you. Maulik, I'd love to turn it over to you. Would love to hear a little bit about the origins of Act to Change coming out of the White House administration, the Obama administration, your leadership there, and recently, some pretty incredible town halls that you actually ran that sort of attracted a lot of kind of great discussion amongst the very sort of incredible kind of cultural community. So I'd love for you to share a little bit about where you're coming from.
Yeah, first of all, thank you so much for inviting me to be a part of this. This is like, I have to say, like hearing everybody's stories, both personal stories and also stories from the community is it's so harrowing. But I feel like a day like this is also so uplifting in what you're doing by bringing everyone together, but also seeing how much work is being done as a community to eradicate the things that are happening. So I'm just very honored to be a part of it, and thank you for that. So I'll tell you a little bit about Act to Change. So in 2014, I was appointed by President Barack Obama to serve on the President's Advisory Commission on Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders. And while I was there, I saw statistics that were showing that Asian American and Pacific Islander kids were being bullied at alarming rates. And this was 2014. So this is, this is 13 years after 9/11. We didn't have a Muslim ban yet. We didn't have the COVID crisis. And there was already Asian American and Pacific Islander kids were being bullied at school. And at the time, there was no national anti-bullying campaign that was speaking to the specific needs of AAPI kids in terms of the community. I heard Benny talk about this a little bit, but this idea of not wanting to report. There, when we launched Act to Change, we did 29 listening sessions around the country, and we met with parents, we met with teachers, we met with students, and there definitely is a culture of just put your head down and do your work. It doesn't matter if someone calls you this. Don't make a lot of noise. The Make Noise Today campaign. Why that's so important. But then there was also the fact that other anti-bullying campaigns weren't speaking to the fact that Asian American and Pacific Islander kids are bullied for the religion they practice, for their accents, for their perceived immigration status, for their parents' perceived immigration status, for the foods that they bring to school. And so that's how Act to Change really started. And then in 2017, and I think Russell, I feel like you might have called him the presidential candidate, which I think is so amazing, and let's hope he loses, was elected to office, and suddenly the White House rhetoric was very anti-Muslim, very anti-immigrant, very anti-anyone of color, really. We moved Act to Change outside of the White House and reformed it as a national nonprofit. And I will say that those initial years, and I know there's a lot of new campaigns on this call tonight, those initial years were tough, to go from a White House campaign that had White House funding and a White House staff to suddenly being like 3 people from the White House trying to like keep this campaign alive was really, really challenging, but we stuck it out. And now in 2020, we have an incredibly diligent and passionate working board. We have an advisory council that consists of luminaries like Surgeon General Dr. Vivek Murthy and editor-in-chief of Allure magazine Michelle Lee, and fashion celebrity Tan France, business whiz Bing Chen, who we all know, TFA's Sarah Ha. And because we were able to stay a robust organization when COVID hit, and Russell, Stop AAPI Hate, started documenting all these cases, and NextShark started putting all these articles out in the world, we knew we had to do something. And so that's when we launched the town halls that you're talking about. That's when we started launching what we called convos. And we did 3 COVID convos where we literally just talked about the racism affecting the Asian American community. And we had Dr. Murthy on, Congresswoman Grace Meng, Randall Park, Hudson Yang. And then when Black Lives Matter happened and we saw this need for the Asian American community to stand together with the the Black community in America, we did a solidarity convo, we did a pride convo where we addressed the relationship not only between Asian Americans and pride, but also with Black trans lives matter. And I would say our pinnacle event in the last few months was an event called United We Stand. And I think this one's a really important one to highlight because a year ago, on May 18th, on the birthday of Vincent Chin, Act to Change launched the first ever AAPI Day Against Bullying and Hate. And in its first incarnation, I'll be honest, it was pretty small. It was a big accomplishment, but it was pretty small. This year, we had over 200 partner organizations, the support of, I think, 20 major cities across the country. And we put together an event with luminaries like Padma Lakshmi and Daniel Day Kim and Ken Jeung and Helen Zia and Lisa Ling and Cal Penn and so many more people. And the reason I bring this up, and I know I'm taking a lot of time here, so I'll wrap it up. But the reason I bring this up is because I think, Helen Zia talked about this with the murder of Vincent Chin and how it was one of the first times that the Asian American community across the board, all the full diaspora, the full, genders, sexual identities, ages, everybody came together to demand justice for Vincent Chin. And I feel like that is what has happened again with the COVID crisis. And so, I'm so grateful for this ad that the Ad Council is putting out. And Elliot, you talked about how a few people can create content that impacts millions. And this kind of messaging is just so important. So I'll end it with that because I know there's probably more you want to talk about.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's sort of ask each of you, I'll ask for a 2-minute response of what's next for you. So Benny, NextShark, what's next? I know you've been working with Jeff and Admirasia on the map, but as you think about the roadmap in the next 3, 6, 9, 12 months, like what's next for NextShark?
Oh, that's a very, very good question. I mean, it's definitely a loaded one because there's so many, challenges that we deal with. I mean, for us, in the media space, there's already been a lot of like turmoil, and even to be an independently owned and minority owned one, there's definitely much more challenges there. I think that for us, like, we're really just trying to support and help the community as much as we can. I mean, there's obviously a business side to we obviously want to grow as a business, but we also kind of understand that everybody is kind of struggling in their own way right now. And I think that, we're not really too focused on growth at the moment. We're really just trying to, kind of sustain ourselves in any way necessary, but also like any resources we have to, help out in any way possible. That's what we'll do. And that's why, we've put resources to work with, Admirasia, for racism is contagious with that. Matt, we did in cooperation with Russel too, with all that data that he's provided, which is amazing. And secondly, another second one that we launched was after, since the advent of the Black Lives Matter movement now, we've recently launched the map that kind of helps amplify a lot of these GoFundMe campaigns of small BIPOC businesses across the country that need help, that need funding. And initially, we kind of like started this just to help streamline Asian American owned businesses, but we kind of realized that as we started building this up, we realized that Asian American community we're not the only ones that suffered throughout this whole thing. I mean, black owned businesses were also looted, Latino owned businesses were also looted, and we felt that we really, if we were going to help like us too, we wanted to help as many people as possible. And so that's kind of like our position at the moment, just to just offer us as long as we can help, that's what we're going to do.
Great. Thank you very much. Maulik, I'm going to turn it back over to you. What's next for Acts to Change? What are the things that you're looking to scale in the next year?
Yeah, so I'll go through 4 things really fast. 1, we are a fully volunteer organization, so we are always trying to build capacity and fundraise so we can have staff to make the work sustainable. 2, data is so important. I heard Russell and Maria talk about these numbers that are out there, but a lot of the data around bullying at large is old. And we know that it's increased massively due to the current rhetoric and everything around COVID. So we have actually partnered with Benny and with Russell, but we constantly need more resources around data. We're launching a series of classroom convos where we are literally going to target these webinars for younger kids to teach them about the history of racism and what we need to be doing to change that. And then I would say that our North Star thing that we really want to do, we've had a lot of success engaging directly with young people with conferences around the country or having them investigate bullying practices and make recommendations to make their schools' policies better. So we have this North Star program that we would like to implement we call it a youth activation program, where we bring young people from across the country together, find out how the bullying is presenting to them and what they think will make it better, and then arm them with the tools to go back into their own communities and create sustainable systems that will eradicate bullying. And that's a big one that's, I think, is going to require a lot of funding and support, but we think it's doable.
As do I. So I'm really excited about what you're doing along with Benny. It feels like there's a lot of integration that's going on, which is sort of the point of these sort of discussions, is the audience is thinking about things that they want to sort of integrate in. Like, I think this is a really great example of like the cross collaboration that's happening. Maria, how about yourself?
Yeah, I mean, I'm incredibly proud of my team and seeing how this tiny group of volunteers, what they've been able to accomplish together. I can't help but think if we all collectively work on this, the kind of impact and even greater change that we can bring. So for example, next week I'm connecting with some folks at Wyden and Kennedy to brainstorm on what we can do next for Respond to Racism. And the fact that these two competitive agencies are able to come together, unite, and rally around this great cause is amazing. And we have one of the best weapons in this fight against racism, which is creativity. We're natural problem solvers. We can come up with even more great ideas to tackle this issue, but we need the right brands and partners and leaders to really step up and support us, whether that be in the form of allocating resources or funding or helping us to spread the word about our initiative. And I just want to quickly highlight one of the things that I learned while working on this Twitter bot. It's extremely difficult to train AI to identify hate speech. It's something that all social media platforms are really struggling with right now. So instead of playing the blame game, I was thinking, what if we all offered our partnership and put our heads together and help these social media giants find an algorithm that will eventually help all of us get to a more permanent solution. I mean, these are just one of the many things that we're discussing with my team. But Respond to Racism is an open platform, and I would love to see all of you, more brands, more agencies, collaborate with us, join us, so that we can continue to respond to racism against our Asian community, as well as other marginalized groups now and in the future.
Great. Thank you, Maria. And then Russell, what's next for Stop API Hate?
Stop API Hate has a lot to do. And I actually think about the collaboration that you, Elliot, have brought us together. Maulik and Maria have spoken to our youth internship program, and we're collaborating with Act to Change and want to use those spots to have our youth respond and address tweets. And so we're going to continue to collaborate and with our data come up with policy reports. We're going to have a back to school youth policy report, giving best practices, working with Act to Change on bullying, how to incorporate anti-racism curriculum, ethnic studies curriculum, how to create policies that people can report well. We're working with the National Asian Pacific American Women's Forum to do a women's report. And women are really impacted by street harassment, and a lot of the same policies to address the street harassment that women face would also help Asian Americans at this moment. We're going to do a policy report on the elderly with the AARP. So we're coming out with a lot of policy reports. We're writing to Governor Newsom in California this week to get the Department of Employment and Fair Housing to better enforce civil rights laws. So, just to wrap it up, we really want to build the movement. I talked about how the status of Asian Americans is conditional at this moment. We're outsiders, and we're trying to build the movement for Asian Americans so that we could belong to America, but not belong to the way America used to be, based on slavery and the stealing of indigenous lands, but to imagine a new America. And I think that's what we ultimately want to do, is build a movement where Asian Americans could belong to an America that we could be proud of.
Thank you very much, Russell. And for everybody out in the audience, I think we're going to, again, send a link with all of the different resources, the Ad Council, every group that was mentioned here. Maria, I think you actually had a specific request to send the Twitter handle for Respond to Racism out. So if you don't mind just doing that. There was a Q&A question that came up, which I actually think is really important, which is, do you think that some Asian Americans take pride in being model minorities? Is there a shift in that sentiment? What do you perceive as the best way for Asian Americans to have solidarity with other marginalized groups? And everybody will have a point of view there. I certainly do.